So we're going to talk about several aspects of Israel and that Lebanon thing separately. But what about the? I just showed you a bunch of Americans that are trying to push this. What about the Israeli side, and why do they want Trump to go back to a kinetic operation that any rational assessment can say would not achieve the outcome we're looking for?
Israel views Iran as a threat for sure. They maybe an existential threat. They view them as a political threat, definitely, because they support the Palestinian cause. They are championing the underdog, the Palestinian cause. But Israel's main concern, in terms of its priorities, is not Iran, because Iran's shown that they will cease hostilities. If nobody's firing at them, they will stop as well. So Iran's a rational actor internationally. Israel's not so concerned with them in that respect. What Israel's concerned with is its objectives in their immediate vicinity, and that is territory in South Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, possibly beyond this, certainly in Syria as well. So about expanding their borders, this is an opportunity that Israel cannot pass up. They have made tremendous progress in expanding their borders and stealing territory from numerous neighboring Arab states. And so they believe that this is a golden opportunity historically for Israel to realize the dream of the Greater Israel Project, at least the first initial steps of it anyway. And so that's their concern. And so they're quite happy for the U.S. to do all the heavy lifting and to trade blows with Iran, be they diplomatically or militarily. And Israel's going to get busy over here with what it's doing with South Lebanon. And Iran's clever, and they're a real geopolitical actor, because they have the leverage, they have the clout to pull the Lebanon issue into the negotiations. In other words, it's part of the quote deal, any deal that's going to happen. Why? Because Iran knows that Israel can use civilians in Lebanon. They know Iran cares about Palestinians and Lebanese and people in the region, and Israel can use that as leverage against Iran, or to stymie negotiations to spoil negotiations with the U.S. That's why they made that specific demand months ago, that there has to be a ceasefire in Lebanon, because Iran doesn't want to expose itself for Israel being able to use that in the three-way sort of dynamic between the U.S., Israel, and Iran when it comes to negotiations. Four-way if you count Lebanon. But Lebanon doesn't have any agency, as we can see at the moment, aside from what Hezbollah is doing in South Lebanon to defend that territory. So it's very clever that Iran is not letting that go and allowing that to be a separate item, because by doing that, it's weakening the things that it's trying to negotiate elsewhere.
And let's take a look at that. If Israel is providing a tailwind to want to go back into a foolish decision to go back to war, they're providing a headwinds toward the second one, which is a negotiated settlement. Now, I've heard from a lot of folks, and we've had some on this show, that say the biggest fear that Israel actually has is that Trump will give in to the quote pressure and have a negotiated settlement of any kind to get this over with. And as you mentioned, one of the biggest issues, maybe the biggest issue in there, is the Lebanese issue. Now, here's what Netanyahu said just this morning on that topic.
There will not be a situation where Hezbollah attacks our cities and our citizens and its terror headquarters in Beirut and the Dahiyya remain out of bounds.
So, man, you just listen to that, especially as a Western audience, is like, well, yeah. I mean, man, if these terrorists are attacking Israel down there, for crying out loud, of course, they have every right to defend themselves. So how dare you suggest otherwise? Oh, wait a minute. Let's look at the news. Israel invaded Lebanon, opening a new front against Iran. And that's back on March 16th in this particular iteration of it here. So you can't invade a country and then say, okay, well, they fought back, and so how dare they? And so that's why we have to keep going on, because you have this, really this circular illogic, if you will. But now for those who may not know, some people, even those who watch the show, may think that, okay, well, Hezbollah has been a kind of a proxy for Iran, so I can see why they would care a little bit. But I want to show you what Nima Al-Horshid said on our show, because it's not just kind of important, it is centrally important to Iran.
The other 2 points which are so important on the part of Iranian is the immediate release of $12 billion in frozen Iranian assets. That it's going to be part of the deal. When they announce this, the signing of this document, the two sides will announce that they have signed the document. There has to be an immediate release of this $12 billion of Iranian frozen assets. And the second point, which is so important in my opinion, which is the most important point in the whole memorandum of understanding, is the ceasefire in Lebanon. There is no way that Iran would accept without any sort of deal, any sort of agreement with the United States, and without having a ceasefire in Lebanon. These are huge issues, Colonel. I don't know if the United States is going to be some sort of leverage to put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel to do such a thing.
So let me ask you, I mean, we could talk about all kinds of deals, this memorandum of understanding and opening the strait and the two blockades opening up, and we could talk about a lot of those, and those are important. But if you don't get past this Lebanese issue, then none of the other stuff even gets brought up to the table. So why do you suppose, or better question is, on the surface of it, it looks like that Israel has a veto over any negotiations at all by saying we'll just keep accelerating and escalating in Lebanon, no matter what President Trump says. So is Israel really driving the train here?
Yeah, they are. And that's very well put, Daniel. They do have that kind of veto over negotiations, so long as Lebanon's included in that package. And but over time, if Iran sticks to its guns and doesn't give any leeway on that, eventually that pulls Israel into the blame game. So people then can blame people who want to see peace, who want to see stability in the region, will be able to blame on Israel. That's what's eventually going to happen if it hasn't already begun already. So what Israel's doing is playing basically a deception game, saying that Hezbollah is attacking, they're terrorizing Israelis. They're only hitting military targets. Israel, on the other hand, is killing thousands of Lebanese civilians, and they're threatening mass annihilation and giving evacuation orders to, like the third largest city in the in Lebanon, the city of Tyre, the historic city of Tyre, giving evacuation orders, saying you've got to clear out, and we're going to level the place. I mean, again, we're back to the genocide narrative. It's exactly the tactics they use in Gaza. So this is one of the problems with this conversation. And of course, I have to be very careful how I frame it because of the legal proscriptions of Hezbollah as a quote as a terrorist group, according to Western governments and Israel. Because that's part of the problem in this conversation. Because if you show any recognition that Hezbollah is an example, which is based in South Lebanon, they are from South Lebanon, that they are fighting an anti-occupation liberation struggle against an invading enemy, then you can fall foul of censorship laws or terrorism laws, and etc. That's one of the problems. And Israel doesn't have to abide by any of these sort of guardrails in terms of the conversation, but anybody else does. But it's kind of glaringly obvious how lopsided the situation is in Lebanon. But Israel continues to get away with it because they have the wind at their back in terms of the war of speech control because of the terrorism designation of Hezbollah. So that's a big part of the problem, and it means that there's going to be no negotiations, or there's going to be no kind of dialogue between the sovereign elements in Lebanon and everybody else. And Netanyahu's lying, saying that Hezbollah is terrorizing Israelis, because they're not. They're engaged in a very strict military battle with military targets. Israel, on the other hand, is engaged in actual terrorism. They're killing civilians en masse and threatening to level cities. I mean, that's about as terroristic as you can possibly get.
Yeah, I know you had that issue of the designations. For those who may not be clear on this, I wonder if you could just real quick, kind of a side diversion here. The claim is always, well, Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, like Iran started all these proxies to go after Israel, etc. But as far as you understand, what is the actual origin of Hezbollah? How did they create? What caused them to be created in the first place, or them to rise up?
Well, I'm being historical fact. Hezbollah didn't exist and wouldn't exist if not for Israel's occupation of South Lebanon for 2 decades, for 20 years, the 1980s and 1990s, let's say. Okay, the Hezbollah was created and founded and born out of that situation, because what Israel did was they had this. They deputized this sort of trustee force, Israeli proxy force, this South Lebanese security force, the South Lebanese army, and used that to basically brutalize the local population during the 80s and 90s. And Hezbollah was fighting against that. So, and they came formally into existence, formally in 1985, long after the Beirut Marine barracks bombing. But the one thing the U.S. always cite that is like Hezbollah's killing Americans is the Beirut Marine barracks bombing. Well, there's a number of other explanations and actors that would have an interest, including Israel itself, but that's a separate argument, to see the United States out of Lebanon during that in 1982, in 1983. So that's a separate conversation. But they exist. There would be no Hezbollah if not for Israel occupying South Lebanon. You could probably make the same technical argument with regards to Hamas. In Gaza, there would be no Hamas if there wasn't the brutal occupation and all the sort of periodic culling, or what Israel is called mowing the lawn in Gaza. There would be no Hamas. I mean, they wouldn't exist. So that's the problem with this conversation. We really can't have an objective argument and analysis because it's so heavily loaded. When you slap that terrorism label on, basically cannot have an objective analytical conversation. Quite frankly, it makes it very difficult to get closer to any kind of meaningful negotiated settlement because you're dealing with the indigenous population.
Yeah,
but,
and so let's
it's hard. It's very hard.
Let's look at that part of that same equation here.